the many good pleasures I receive in ministry is being able to sit down and talk with members of the parish one-on-one. And in part of our conversations, sometimes we end up talking about the many trips that you have taken throughout your lives. Some of you have taken great treks all over the world, from Europe to India, and some have cruised down the Mississippi River. Some of you have even had the good fortune of traveling the pathways of Paul's missionary routes. Once you arrive at these various designations which you have traveled to, you sometimes find yourself in a strange land, having to navigate new terrain in a different language. Let's admit that it's easy enough to miscommunicate in our own language, but in another language, the possibilities to misunderstand or to offend one another, well, they're nearly endless, aren't they? Here are a few examples from the business world. The Swedish vacuum cleaner manufacturer Electrolux used the following in an American advertising campaign: "Nothing sucks like an Electrolux." Sounds a little lost in translation there. In Italy, Schweppes tonic water was wrongly translated into Schweppes toilet water. An American t-shirt maker in Miami printed shirts for the Spanish market, which was promoting the Pope's visit to America. Instead of saying, "I saw the Pope" in Spanish, it said, "I saw the potato." Not nearly as exciting. Also, in China, the Kentucky Fried Chicken slogan, "Finger licking good," didn't quite translate. There it came out, "Eat your fingers off." So I have to be very careful when we translate into other languages. I want you to notice when we read about these first apostles that they are a multicultural group of people. Simon is called Niger. Perhaps that's a reference to being a descendant of Africa. Lucius is of Cyrene. They are called prophets and teachers, and they are a diverse group before they ever leave home. So their communication with each other might have already been spotty at times. But we can only wonder what Paul and Barnabas must have faced as they left the church in Antioch, Syria, to go spread the good news on this first missionary journey. When they get to Lystra, which is modern-day Turkey, they encounter a man who has been crippled from birth. In chapter 14, verse 9, it says, "He listened to Paul as Paul was speaking." Now, we're not even sure exactly what language Paul was speaking. In that time period and from that geographical location, Paul could have been speaking in Aramaic, a form of Hebrew, Greek. These were the languages that were spoken in Galilee and Judea at the time. Linguists believe that Aramaic was the mother tongue of the region. Perhaps this man spoke in a Lycaonian dialect that's mentioned in verse 11, which may have been some form of an Assyrian language or some Syriac language intermingled with Greek. We don't know exactly what languages they are speaking to one another. But despite any linguistic barrier, when Paul spoke, this man heard him. At least he listened to him. In verse 9 it says, Paul looked at him intently and could see that he had the faith to be healed. Then Paul instructed him in his tongue to get up. And we're told, it's more closely translated, that the man leaps to his feet. Somehow, despite all of these barriers, they are able to communicate to each other in some form of a mutual faith. One that Paul had had placed upon him by the Holy Spirit, and one that once received by the man at Lystra had some healing components. Other people observed this, and they shouted, and once again it's called in the Lycaonian language, that Paul and Barnabas, well, they must be Zeus and Hermes. They know of no other power mightier that this could be attributed to than to their pantheon of gods. Barnabas and Paul correct them, for these people have misunderstood. And just as Jesus instructed that the power of God could not be contained in a temple in Jerusalem, now they must demonstrate that they are not a personification of false gods. They tell the people, we are mortals, just like you. But I wonder, is that really the case? Are they simply mortals just like anybody else walking the earth? I disagree, for they have been empowered by the Holy Spirit. The apostles have embarked on a journey that is inspired. It is a combination of human and divine efforts. They received their guidance from the Holy Spirit, but also, we are told, he came to them through fasting, through praying, and through the laying on of hands. Now, good disciples know what the laying on of hands is and how powerful it can be. It's something that we do in a service when we ordain pastors and when we ordain elders. We realize that these people have particular gifts to be employed in service to the church, but we recognize that those are gifts that come from God. And in these divine human encounters, we are able to transcend linguistic barriers, differences in nationality, perceived differences caused by skin pigmentation. We can, without understanding one another's culture or language, we can still listen to one another, and we can see the faith in a brother or a sister's eyes. And it got me to wondering, how did this man in Lystra have the faith? The apostles had only just arrived. This was the first missionary journey. This man received no prior instruction. This is in the days before pamphlets could be distributed, before the church even really existed, and there certainly were no Bibles being passed out. Yet this man, he seemed to already have the faith when Paul got there. How else could Paul have recognized it in him? In divine human interactions, the Spirit intercedes on our behalf, giving us lines of communication that we otherwise might not have access to, and somehow it interceded in such a way that that man had faith by the time of their arrival. I am grateful that throughout my life I've been able to do a modest amount of travel. Now, there are times when a luxury vacation is in order, when you just need to relax and sit on the beach with a drink with an umbrella in it. I get that. I completely understand. But there are also times when we need to stretch ourselves, when we need to go to a place that might cause us discomfort, when we might need to live among people, however briefly that might be, who are different from us. We need to go to countries where they speak different languages, where there is a different standard of living. And you know what? You don't even have to leave the United States to find others who live a vastly different lifestyle than we do. And we can go and be with those people and learn what it might be to occupy their place in this world. Traveling, being among people who are different, it builds up empathy for others. It helps us have compassion for what other people might be facing in life. It helps us see who is my neighbor. And most importantly, Secondly, it might teach us how to be neighborly to others. During my time at seminary, it was a requirement to have a cultural immersion experience. And I was fortunate to have two. One took place as we studied the 8th century BCE prophets in Appalachia, a very interesting course that took place over the course of a couple of weeks. And then the next, which I've told you about, was to visit with our missionaries in Venezuela and to take a tour throughout Latin America. Both of these cultural immersion experiences happened over one summer with about 3 days in between, just enough time to fly home to Lexington, to get all my dirty clothes out of the suitcase, to wash them and repack, ready to go on another trip. And I cannot describe for you how life-changing those experiences were. The poverty I encountered here in the United States and abroad, the different cultures, the pride that people have in who they are and where they are from, all of that was so important for me to see. Yes, even experiencing the difference in dialect and language. It was really hard in Venezuela, but I had some challenges just in Appalachia, from English to a different kind of English. One evening I had the blessing to worship among the Christians in Espiritu, Venezuela. And somehow, despite all of our perceived differences, I managed to make a heart connection, I believe, with a beautiful family who just happened to be worshiping beside me that night. Now, I want you to understand the scene. We had already worshiped for hours in the blistering sun that day, but that wasn't enough. We came back at night to worship for a few more hours. Even at night, it felt like it was 5,000 degrees, and we just had sweat dripping off of us. But that didn't stop us from dancing and moving and worshiping with our bodies, as was the custom there in Venezuela. The way we worship would probably make Gladys or Norma Lyle faint, but it was worship. It was very different than what we do here, sitting in a dignified and stately worship service. Over the course of the hours, I would attempt to speak in my broken Spanish, and I don't know how well I communicated or not, but she would nod and smile back at me. And I noticed that this woman's teenage son went off and sat in a corner, and I was watching to see what he was doing, and he seemed very intently to be working on a piece of paper, maybe drawing or coloring something. He was completely unaware of the music and the shouting and the spirit going on all around him as we continued to worship. The mother must have been tired of holding that squiggly baby. You know how hot it can be when you have that close contact with another human's skin. And so to offer her some relief, I outstretched my arms to see if I could hold the baby for a while. And she allowed me to hold this most precious of her gifts, her baby daughter. By the end of the evening, I don't know how to describe it, but somehow we deeply loved each other. We could recognize that love between one another. And when it was time for us to board the bus and get back to our hotel, we embraced and we cried, knowing that we would never see each other again. And it was at that moment that the teenage son approached us, and he had this beautiful drawing that he gave me of a rose. He'd been busy the entire time making that, and he gave it to me as a parting gift. And then the mother reached up into her hair and gave me the comb that had been holding back her beautiful, long, black locks. Me, someone who, by comparison, had so much already, received these humble and precious gifts, and I treasure them to this day. Sometimes we cross borders and barriers, and despite all that could possibly separate us, we find ourselves united by a bond that can never be severed. Perhaps when they hugged me, they could look into my eyes and they could see the faith that I had, the faith that maybe even I needed to be healed. You see, we went there with missionaries thinking that we were going to be transforming them, and we were humbled to find that our hearts were being transformed. The word that is so often used in the New Testament for healing is sozo. It can also mean saved, and we hear that a lot. They were saved. But in this context, it is healed. The man in the story was healed. That's how he needed to be saved. And I suggest that in our various different states in which we find ourselves, it is some kind of healing that will too save us. I can't wait to see where God is leading us on our missionary journeys, either as individuals, but most importantly, as a church. I want you to know that wherever you go, you have everything you need to find faith that is already there. You see, you never go alone. The Spirit is interceding on your behalf before you even arrive. God has already been preparing your way. We might be mere mortals, but I suggest to you, mortals on a mission inspired by God, empowered by the Holy Spirit, those types of mortals can change this world. After the missionary journey and others like it, the world would be changed just by a small band of people. Our faith started off as a very local endeavor. Christianity had not made much of a splash outside of Jerusalem or Galilee or Capernaum. Wherever Jesus went, it caused some attention to be cast upon it, but it really was a small faith. It was a regional story at best. And now we know what an impact those early apostles had. What I wonder after reading the story this time is how Paul and Barnabas were changed by their experiences in Turkey, particularly with this man in Lystra. I bet that when they went back to their Antioch in Syria, that they were able to translate the good news even more effectively after this experience. Because where they went, they met God's people, but they met God abroad. They took faith with them, but God had already planted that seed. Don't think that you need to travel very far to have this kind of experience. Take a moment with those you encounter to listen to them. That is what that man did. He listened. And then be like Paul and take a moment to gaze. That is the word that is used, to gaze upon them. Spend enough time in just those two activities so that you can see the faith planted in them. And then you can grow to expect to see it there. For the Holy Spirit is interceding on our behalf. And we, good people, we have a journey